Good to go. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Ritchie. I'm the Managing Director of MRA Consulting. Thank you for coming to this session. You're in a session to talk about international collaborations and how to find and extract the best value out of our international connections. We've got a great panel for this session. Hopefully the room fills up as we go. What we're going to do is ask each of the panellists to speak for 10 minutes and then we'll open it up for questions around a very broad topic. So it's as broad as you want to make it, and we've got some great experts here, so let me do some introductions. Joan Prummel is the International Circular Economy Advisor for the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management, and he's here part of the Dutch delegation. Joan will speak first. Then we have Jessie-Lynn van Egmond. She is the Circular Development Manager for Hoeven, have I got that right? Horticultural Projects, an expert in greenhouse technology, interestingly enough, and she's going to talk about applications for that. So they're our international guests, and then we thought, well, we better connect it to Australia. So we've got Phil Carbins, the General Manager of Business Development for Veolia, Australia and New Zealand. And Phil knows a lot of connections back to Europe, and then we brought a consultant in. So in this case, Richard Collins. Richard Collins is the National Discipline Manager for Waste Advisory at Arcadis, Australia. And hopefully across that, we have a broad spectrum of how do we connect as Australia to the international environment. A couple of opening comments from me. Australia is currently generating about 67 million tonnes of waste, and we recycle about 40 million tonnes of it. So 27 million tonnes of good quality material is still going to landfill in Australia. And we have a target of getting 80% of that out by 2030. Now, we've got no chance of hitting an 80% across-the-board target. We've also got a target of reducing organics to landfill by 50% by 2030, again in 6 years' time, and a target of achieving a 10% reduction in waste generation per capita, which is our circular economy goal, if you like, reducing per capita generation by 10%, and in that, since 2019 when that target was adopted, per capita generation has increased by 2.8%. So we're going in the wrong direction. So what can we learn internationally? How can we accelerate the journey? How do we get infrastructure in place? How do we get the pricing and governance mechanisms accelerated so that we actually have a chance in New South Wales and across Australia to actually even get close to those targets? So far, there is no state and territory that is likely other than South Australia, maybe with construction demolition, and West Australian with a couple of their streams. But overall, very little chance. So can we use our international connections, investment, infrastructure, governance, policies, to help accelerate the journey towards a more circular economy and achieve our waste management targets and our zero emissions targets? So with that quick introduction and context setting, I'll open it up to Johan, and 10 minutes, over to you, sir.
10? 10 minutes?
Yeah, you can go 15 if you want to.
15 if you want it. I think there's one slide missing, but that's okay. I'm Joan Prummel. I work for the Dutch government as an international circular economy advisor, specifically assigned to accelerate and stimulate circularity outside of our country. And I'm going to explain you why in a minute, and that has everything to do with international collaboration. So I'll show you a few slides that I used this morning, only a few, but it's important to understand where we come from. So global population is growing rapidly, global material use is growing rapidly, and the impact of that is not only on material scarcity, it's on land and water use, it's on climate, it's on pollution, it's on biodiversity. So a lot of impact caused by our own material use stimulated us to look at measures, look at ways to fight that. And the way we see it, circular economy is the perfect approach to that. So recognize this might just be in Australia, climate change, fires and drought and storms, biodiversity. Very, very interesting that every day 150 species become extinct. This is a United Nations number. Pollution, these are huge global issues. These are things that we in the Netherlands cannot fight by ourselves. These are things with a global impact. So if circularity for us is a way to address this and to have less pollution and less biodiversity loss, then we need the rest of the world to become circular as well. And we're not the only ones looking at it that way. Otherwise, it would be a bit silly to be here. But there's a lot of countries. All of Europe looks at it the same way. Circular economy is an approach to a better planet, if you will. So from that comes international collaboration. And what I'm going to show you is just some examples, not specifically about waste management. We'll get to talk about waste management anyway, I guess. Like I said, circular impact needs global scale. If we want the impact on biodiversity, on pollution, on climate change, then we need the huge volumes that produce that. So 10% of the global population lives in Europe and Northern America. Actually, I think with or without Australia, it would more or less be the same percentage. 90% lives in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. That means that if we want to actually create global impact, we need to transfer our knowledge, but also our investments to the regions where all these people live and work and consume and produce. They will create the real needed impact from circular economy, not what we invent in reuse of materials in an Amsterdam office building. So what we do is create a lot of international exchange, and I name a few, the international projects that we're in. That's mainly European. We're setting up a circular procurement network internationally. A lot of masterclasses and trainings, visits like these, publications. We have a lot of stuff online, publications and tools. And the last two I'll explain a bit more about, the support that we give to learning networks. That's on circular procurement. We call them Green Deals. And the Circular and Fair ICT Pact. So the Green Deals on circular procurement are basically a very simple approach to have organizations experiment with circularity in their procurement. And we set it up in the Netherlands in 2013, did a second round, so altogether we had 8 years of this Green Deal. And a lot of countries around us actually appreciated the impact of it because it's accelerated learning, but also accelerating circular impact. So, well, you can see the names. We supported a lot of countries in setting up their own learning networks, and happy and willing to support Australia as well if wanted. These learning networks all together, and the buyer groups that come from them, buyer groups are the same type of learning networks, organizations that practice together with procurement and circular economy only in a specific sector, in a specific product group. If we put them all together, then we create a network of not only learning networks, which can exchange, but we also create a network of real impact. Circular economy, we say that a lot, circular economy doesn't stop at any borders. So we need these networks to become regional hubs of knowledge and experience to exchange. So the aim, if we have 10 of these networks, we'll have 1,000 working circular business cases, creating real circular economy. So it's not only knowledge transfer, it's also creating real impact. The other one is the Circular and Fair ICT Pact. Now that's specifically very interesting because ICT is an international sector with a few very big brand owners who dominate the market. So the procurement power that we might have as a government in a lot of markets, that doesn't go for ICT. What we as a national government buy in a year in laptops and desktops is one-day production for Hewlett Packard. So we need to power up, as we say. We need to connect a lot of different procuring organizations to create volume to actually get around the table with them, with the brand owners, with the big companies. This is a UNEP project, United Nations Environment Program. We're part of that, and they sponsor it. And what we do actually is ask participants to sign up for a few things. We'll have shared ambitions. We'll create market dialogue together. We'll set up these buyer groups together. And very interesting, together we find criteria that we're going to use all over the world. So everybody, every country or region or city, every municipality that wants to join this can join, sign up, and then commit to using the same type of criteria, ask for the same requirements in products, which we call joint statements of demand. That's not joint procurement, it's just saying we're going to buy the same stuff with the same type of requirements, so that the industry also knows which direction they should innovate. This is a growing network. We started in 2018, I think, and it's still growing. I think Australia just recently also signed on a federal level. We also have an international network of hotspots. You might have heard of that. I think Planet Ark is the host of the local circular economy hotspot in Australia. That's about international exchange of experience, not only on procurement, but on every aspect of circular economy. And my final slide, just one before, just a short statement. Circular economy is always international in the end. You need local initiatives, they are very important, but if you want to create real impact on climate, on biodiversity, on pollution, then you need a global scale. So you need the global solutions, you need the worldwide impact, and you also need to consider, and that's an important thing for us at least, but maybe also for Australia, we'll have a lot of impact in other countries. 50% of the carbon emissions for the complete Dutch economy is outside of our country. 70% of the water use for our national economy is outside of our country. So we need to work international to make a difference. So, well, like I say over there, there's no Dutch or Australian economy, circular economy, without international circular economy. We need to collaborate on that. So my last slide statement, we need international collaboration to create real impact. Thank you.
Thanks, Joan. Jess, over to you.
Over to me. Thank you, Joan, for your presentation. I think if I click, will it go to mine? Here we go. So my name is Jessie-Lynn van Egmond. I work for the horticultural industry. So I don't work for the waste sector actually, but I work in the food sector. I have a background in water and food, so I'm a bit, as we would say in Holland, the odd dog in the pond, perhaps. But I'm curious for this audience as well. Does everybody work in the waste sector, or are there also people working in the food sector? Yes, okay, there we go. One person, welcome. So it's just you and me here today representing food. The question that keeps me busy on a daily basis is how are we going to feed the future? And I think actually the waste sector and the food sector have similar challenges, but also have very beautiful solutions that we can think of and come up with together. So that's why I'm here today, also why I'm here at the conference, and why I'm part of the Dutch delegation surrounding waste management and circular economy. So who do I work for? I work for Van der Hoeven Horticultural Projects. It's in basis a Dutch company, but 98% of our projects are international. We also have Australian projects already, and what do? We develop turnkey, high-tech, and circular greenhouses and have been doing so since 1953, so for quite some time. We focus on consultancy, on design, engineering, building, and since recently also on operation. Because what you have seen through the decades is that our clientele at start was a grower that really knew a lot about growing crop. Now what you see is that there's a huge shift to more international investments, and then we also take on the part of actually 5 to 10, 2, 3, 4, you name it, contracts where we take on the cultivation of the crop to make sure that the amount of production that the greenhouses can produce is actually achieved. What's so special and what is our specialization about Van der Hoeven or about high-tech glass houses is that they have controlled environmental agriculture. So if you look inside the glass house, really what happens, everything is controlled. The temperature, the humidity, the amount of water that is given. So you can create the perfect climate for the different crops like lettuce, tomatoes, capsicum, strawberries, raspberries, or other perishables for them to really flourish. It also means that we need much less land, and you could say, okay, Australia already has a lot of land, so that's not an issue, but because we grow soilless and because we grow in a way where everything is controlled, we can also grow on areas that are not productive anymore for agriculture. So think of contaminated areas, or areas that used to be polluted by waste, or other regions that have been salinized, or where monoculture has affected the soil in such a way that it's no longer suitable for open field cultivation. Besides that, it's also protected against natural disaster to some extent, or at least to a bigger extent than open field. And then my favorite part, you can also integrate it with waste streams. So we're an end market for waste products, which is also why we're here, but I will get back to that a bit later. This is a map of where we're currently present. The darker regions are the regions where we have built greenhouses. In a nutshell, it is areas that are either too cold, too hot, too humid, or too arid to have full year cultivation of crops in. So you can really think of the thick layers of snow in Kazakhstan, but also the very arid regions like in Australia. This is a small impression. The tomato pictures you see on the right, they're from our Australian greenhouses. The lettuce greenhouse that you see on the left at the bottom is from one of our Dubai greenhouses. To give an example and to illustrate the production level that we're reaching, for that specific greenhouse would be around 30,000 heads of lettuce a day. So they really are food factories. And there's really high amount of kilograms per square meter of produce that you can obtain when you operate in a good way. I really love this next slide. It might be a bit technical. But for those not working in the horticultural sector, when you think of a greenhouse, you usually have an idea. Some people have the idea of really high tech, other people think of plastic tunnels. All of them are greenhouses. They all have their own benefits and their own types of land and climates that they are suitable for. But in essence, if you look to the left, you see the conventional hydroponic tunnel greenhouse, and then as you move all the way to the right, you see the most high-tech greenhouse that uses a lot of artificial intelligence, has a lot of production, and also is a lot safer to use. Of course, as you move to the right, your investment also goes up. So there's things to say for both sides. If you're really looking for year-round production, there is no choice but to move to the right. Then if you look at the graph next to it, what you see in bright blue is the water demand. So if you look at open field, you see there's huge amounts of water that are being used per kilogram of produce. As you move more to high tech, it actually goes to 96% less than what you would use per kilogram of tomatoes produced. If you look at energy demand, however, you see the opposite happening. For open field, much less energy is used, and then as you move to the right to more high-tech greenhouses, even though the only water that is used in such a high-tech greenhouse is the water that's leaving the greenhouse inside the crop, the energy demand is enormous. So it's like a trade-off. But if we go further than just looking at demand, we also need to look at where are you sourcing your water from, where are you sourcing your energy from, and also where are you sourcing your CO2 from, which I will get to in the next slides. So once we integrate waste streams into a concept such as a high-tech greenhouse, we like to call it circular city greenhouses. The greenhouses of the future, greenhouses that can tackle food security but can also help with managing waste, and where a greenhouse is no longer seen as a black box with resources going in and food coming out, but actually as an essential link to help regions go from linear to circular economies. So what do I mean with that concretely? When we look at a greenhouse, we need 5 input streams. We need water, we need CO2, we need heat, electricity, and nutrients, and all of these can be obtained from waste. In essence, the technology is there. It is already being done with individual waste streams, but it's not being done on larger scale yet. So even to give an example for CO2, we inject CO2 into our greenhouses up to concentrations 4 times outside the normal concentration that you would have walking this planet. There are Dubai greenhouses that are importing liquid CO2 from Pakistan instead of using CO2 that is emitted by an industry standing right next to that greenhouse. That's the level of disconnect that we're also still talking about in the food sector. So these type of bridges really need to be built, and you see it in incidental projects, also here in Australia, and that's very motivating and inspirational, but it does need to happen more often. Then in terms of water as well, there's water being upgraded from a wastewater treatment facility in South Australia, being used for cooling water and irrigation water for greenhouses, but it's not being done enough. We also have projects in Japan, in France, in Western US, and you see it being spread out. But really it's an opportunity, I think, for all of us to integrate waste and food together and to have these type of joint solutions. Then I want to highlight and underline something that I've heard in many of the presentations coming forward, that the challenges of growing population, having more waste because of it, are also the challenges that the food sector is facing. With growing population and urbanization, we will also have not more waste, but more mouths to feed. And all of those mouths will be in the city, or mostly in the city as well. Natural disasters, climate change, globalization, and food chain disruptions, you really see that that's something that the food sector is talking about very heavily. It only got highlighted during COVID, where people saw how dependent they were on import and export, where the self-sufficiency or the sensitivity and the lack of self-sufficiency was really underlined during that period. And a lot of countries are now also investing more and more in food security with high-tech greenhouses. So then to summarize, I have a beautiful slide with the linear economy where food is being imported, where we don't see waste as the opportunity that it is. It's not being processed or it's being deposited into the environment. And then we switch to a more circular economy where the waste sector and food sector are working together, and where high-tech greenhouses or greenhouses in general are an end market for products from the waste sector. And we join hands not just in discussing challenges, but also in discussing solutions. And then the key final message being technology is not the limiting factor, it is cross-sectoral collaboration that we need between the water, energy, waste, and the food sector. And that's the end. And if you want to get a hold of me, this is also my LinkedIn QR code that you can add me on LinkedIn. And I'm excited to talk about it and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Jessie-Lynn. We'll hold questions to the end, but please keep them in mind. Think about all those old landfills across Australia that are all leaking fugitive emissions and methane that could be converted into carbon dioxide by a simple flare and then pump it straight into local greenhouses. I mean, the opportunity in Australia is just enormous, but I don't know whether it's the economics or the markets or maybe that's a discussion point. We have over 2,000 small, inert, under-resourced landfills pumping fugitive methane into the atmosphere right now, representing 3% of Australia's greenhouse gas footprint. The opportunity to capture some of that and do something smart with it is enormous. Phil, over to you.
Thanks, Mike. I think initially just to say a little part of the Veolia story that links into that international collaboration. Veolia globally has 220,000 employees, and I honestly forget the number of countries. There's about 6,000 of us here in Australia. That in itself is collaboration. I guess also when operating in an organisation that large, it brings its own challenges. So as we know, collaboration has opportunities, it has challenges within organisations, but certainly with other organisations and around the globe. Thank you, Jessie, because I think if you duck over to the Veolia stand, you'll see some great outputs from the waste industry that might be organic inputs to your future greenhouses. So another great link there. There's certainly some key differences between the Netherlands and Australia, and that's where we're touching here. As you know, Netherlands is a little bit smaller. It's about 3.5 times the size of Greater Sydney. The Dutch wear clogs, and Aussies wear thongs, so a bit of a variation there. And our windmills are slightly different in size as well. I'm not talking about the wind turbines, I'm just talking about the windmills out on the farm. But there are some similarities as well. Highly multicultural. About 10,000 square metres of our countries are below sea level. And in fact, Australia was once called New Holland. So we're definitely linked there. But I think the unifying challenge is between those countries is around that circular economy, that it does not and cannot be delivered within our borders. We're both global trading countries, as Joan described. We're reliant on the importation of goods into our countries. And in Australia, at least, we have limited ability to ensure that those goods can then be spun around in a circle within our borders. So therefore, the design of the products is critical. There's been plenty of discussion around what goes into products and how they end up in our lives. PFAS is a magic word that's out there, for example. I'm not going to delve into that complex issue, but I would like to provide a rather more simple example of circularity, or perhaps lack of circularity. And that's the humble paper bag that you've all purchased from your local supermarket. This particular brand you'll recognise, Woolworths, made from at least 70% recycled paper, made in China. And our friends at Coles, I think they win because they're made from 100% recycled paper in Vietnam. So we've got a fibre problem. But the reality is that I'm not a paper bag manufacturer, but we must be able to do something better around this to create those circular solutions. We've got new federal government rules coming into place on the 1st of July that impact the exporting of fibre. Limited impact initially, but it's there. I understand the intent of the waste export bans. However, I don't believe they actually deliver on that intent. Partly due to the complexity of our resource recovery industry, and partly because every piece of legislation has unintended consequences, and I'm sure we can delve into some of the details around that. Again, linking our local and our international requirements. But are things changing here in Australia? Absolutely. In the last week, here's a quick snapshot of things that have happened. On Tuesday, the Victorian government increased the landfill levy by $40 a tonne. On Wednesday in Canberra, the Senate Estimates Committee quizzed some of our brightest minds in the resource recovery sector, taking an objective review of the past and hopefully a positive projection into the future. And on Thursday, the Australian Product Stewardship Forum, I think you were part of some of these, was held in Sydney, that brought new ideas and thinking to the benefits and the need for functional, effective product stewardship schemes, and it was discussed this morning as well. We need those schemes that actually deliver outcomes. That was just in 1 week, and now here in Coffs, we need to continue advocating for that change. So what are some of those key drivers? I think that the big one for me is recognising the complexity and connectivity of our manufacturing, distribution, retail, consumer, logistics, resource recovery, reprocessing and reuse industries. They can't be done in isolation, they need to be done collectively. We need the incentive to use recycled and recovered products, or disincentive to use raw material. This morning, Tony Chappell talked about the carrot and stick approach to achieve our success. And we need strong and enforceable government policy, funded product stewardship schemes that make a difference, and recognition of our global networks in which we operate. Perhaps an example might be the federal government implementing a packaging circularity scheme, different from our current voluntary scheme and co-regulatory approach, whereas that they would be mandated by legislation and impose fees based on recyclability, recycling targets and other sustainable outcomes, similar to some of the objectives in the EU. These would be driven by demand requirements rather than the current push model that we have in our waste and resource recovery sector. The EU has developed many of these policies and introduced them over many years, and Australia does not need to reinvent the wheel. We need that collaboration. We do, however, seem to like to reinvent the wheel, and we like to do it at a state level as well. We'd always need to be one slightly better than our neighbours so that we can say we've got the biggest, the best, the brightest, and rather than just taking the good and building on that rather than aiming for the perfect. Circular economy principles and the waste management hierarchy need to be pursued nationally across the whole supply chain, and we need those consistent, strong policy settings. The circular economy is a global economy. I think this is your last slide. Sorry, you've already done that. But Australia and the Netherlands cannot do it alone. It is actually, we need to be part of that global story. and obviously collaboration is part of that. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Phil. Yeah, I think the point about the export, the amount of imported packaging that we bring into Australia and trying to plug that into our national recycling capacity and then ban the export has created a real bottleneck for Australia that we need to unplug. It essentially is supposed to be a quality export arrangement, not a no export arrangement, but as you say, it's kind of morphed into something different from what was expected, I think. Last but not least, Richard Collins, over to you.
Thanks, Mike. So as a good consultant, I'm going to hopscotch around a little bit, cherry pick stories, both possibly good and bad, and take some liberties with the scope of the international collaboration subject. It'll all be about collaboration, but not all international collaboration, because there's not that much from Australia offshore in terms of collaboration. So I run the Circular Economy Waste Advisory Team for Arcadis. We're a proud Dutch company, hence the linkage here. We also operate in 6 continents, so bringing some of that international flavour. A sample of the sorts of projects that my colleagues are working on overseas, and indeed in a collaborative sense in some cases with the Australian team. We have a product sustainability team in Belgium that does a lot of life cycle work, a lot of supply chain analysis work. They're currently doing for us an environmental product declaration for a tyre recycling company. So for those who don't know what an EPD is, it's a kind of a data sheet that has taken a life cycle approach to either the product or the process that created it, and that becomes part of that kind of business literature, and they can use that in certifying their product and its environmental credentials, used a lot in the building and built environment sector in particular. The Sustainable Industries team in the Netherlands, one of the things that we are bidding with them is to develop an eco-labelling scheme for fashion in Denmark, in the Netherlands, excuse me guys. This is a ripple down from an EU textiles policy, so and it's how the Dutch government is looking to mandate and then implement that directive in their national environment, and we might talk some more about federalism in Australia and its challenges. And then we have an ESG team also in the Netherlands. The sorts of things that they are working on is a nature positive strategy for a Japanese pharmaceutical company. So this is a corporate strategy at national level, international. They operate in Asia, North America and Europe, and they're looking to be regenerative. So there's a lot of knowledge sharing in that sense. It's not collaborative outside Arcadis, but it is the sorts of projects that we are getting involved in. I'll move on a little bit from the spruiking of Arcadis. International collaboration. I don't think we see a lot from an Australian perspective in that regard. The Global Plastics Plan, we are a member of the High Ambition Coalition around plastics and looking to get some sort of global pact later in the year. But beyond that, there is limited, and then we have some international treaties, limited engagement in that government policy regulatory sense. One of the learnings, I think, from listening to Dutch colleagues and doing study on the way Europe operates is they have European directives which trickle down to national level and allows flexibility at that national level for countries to adapt to their circumstances, and it's a model that Australia doesn't seem able to implement. Missed Tony Chappell this morning talking, but in last week's presentation at the the Packaging Stewardship Forum, fairly palpable his frustration at the challenges in trying to get all the states and territories to agree to a national project. He was banging on at length about the need for competitive federalism, citing CDS as an example of where New South Wales broke the deadlock on CDS, and then everybody else kind of thought that went a lot better than expected and jumped on board over the next few years, and now we're having the discussion about harmonisation and federal schemes. Now, I'm a bit of a subscriber to that idea. I think we are at risk of analysing and talking to death, trying to get collaboration between states, territories and the federal government. And in some examples, we need to just pull the lever and have a state advance a policy or a program and see how that goes. The EU model of directives, I think, is one we should definitely look at. Industry collaboration is critical. We did a project with the Australian Resilient Flooring Association, which is basically PVC flooring, the old Vinyls Council, and they've got up a product stewardship scheme called ResiLoop. We supported for them some trials of the recyclability. So how do you process pre-consumer vinyl flooring into products, and they had good success in terms of converting, micronizing those products into tiny fragments through milling and grinding, and turning it into garden edging, fence posts, etc. We had about half a dozen recycling companies prepared to do some trials, and that has gone forward. It is the first product stewardship scheme for resilient flooring, PVC flooring in Australia, and now the Australian Recycling Flooring Association is talking about that in Europe and the US to their associations, respectively, over there, and everyone's quite excited over there about how well that's gone. So that is an Australian innovation in terms of product stewardship. Local government, my last major reflection. Harder to see exactly the collaboration offshore with that, but critical roles in terms of their role in the supply chain, so vertical integration, and then also horizontal collaboration between local governments to bulk up, achieve scale. 3 quick things to say on that. We're doing at the moment for the New South Wales government a materials flow analysis at state level. So this is, they've nominated 13 product types, waste types: brick, aggregate, hard plastics, soft plastics, tyres, textiles, etc. It's a data exercise to get at regional scale, understand the volumes, the forecast, the current fates, and then that's going to end up in a public-facing dashboard. So the data story becomes critical if you want to start attracting investment and building business cases. So this is where we're starting to, we're playing in that collaborative sense. What is the material flow through the chain, through the economy, and what are the opportunities? We're also seeing a lot of focus at the moment on joint procurement. In New South Wales, the EPA has a grant program around that. We're involved in a lot of conversations with ROCs and regional groups, as well as individual councils, about how to frame up grant applications, what those opportunities might be. And the conversation that keeps coming up is, how do we get the scale to attract new players into the sector? We feel, and this is in the major waste streams, not so much niche recoverables, but we feel a bit hamstrung with the oligopoly in residual waste, for example. So we are looking for to collaborate with our peers in new treatment technologies, new landfill, even, if that makes sense. So we're trying to get new players into the market and collaborating horizontally. And the last one we're seeing is for local government. There is a lot of interest in how do they get back into the game. This is a New South Wales perspective, I suppose, but we're the Gold Coast example recently with their ARC project. A lot of local government saying, we have some land, we're interested in how do we get a precinct up, how do we have a repair and reuse hub strategy, and we're at risk, I think, of having multiple councils going multiple different directions, where there is an opportunity to do that at a broader scale with a similar specification. And I'm not suggesting that it would necessarily be joint procurement, but if we're specifying the similar sorts of processes, product types, therefore we're going to get the proponents coming forward with replicable processes. It's a way to create scale without necessarily having to aggregate everything into a single facility, but it does have a single process, so some harmonisation. So that's my reflections on some of the collaboration we're seeing horizontally, vertically and internationally.
Great. I'm going to open it. Thanks, Richard. I'm going to open it up to the floor in a minute. But before I do, the other one about competitive federalism, Richard, is New South Wales leading on the levy. And now we've got Victoria just lifted their levy by $40 to bring it up to to New South Wales to try and limit some of that arbitrage. Queensland introduced a $110 levy because they ended up with 1.2 million tonnes of New South Wales waste because they weren't harmonised. And now they've lifted their aspiration towards $140. So you're absolutely right. If one state leads, others tend to follow, and maybe that is the model rather than waiting for the feds to move beyond their statutory responsibility, which tends to be where they land their locus of attention, which is EPR and international import-export and hazardous waste. So with that comment, I'm happy to open up to the floor. And if there are none... Oh, okay, Christian.
Christian Pagliaro, Local Government, New South Wales. For anyone, or Richard, actually, noting your link with local councils and how they can interact internationally, would you say there's an argument for more pressure to be applied at the federal level to commit to international standards for, IKEA office chairs, for instance, because that ends up being the council's responsibility and cost, but the state can't do it and the Australian government can't do it. So that should be an international effort to get a standard up for that, so that that chair has a reuse or a repair or whatever it is.
Yeah, great question, Christian, and I absolutely think there is a critical role there. Remember talking to the Australian Furniture Association, and they had an example of China has implemented EU standards around chemicals content in furnishings, and they are happy to send a couch to Australia because our standards are lower now than the Chinese standards. If that couch is damaged, we're not able to send that back because it can't be imported back into China because their standards are now stricter than ours. So there's absolutely some critical need to have import standards and then transparency as well. So, are we able to safely recycle a product, repair a product? So what are the chemical contents? What is the composition of that? So we have also done some work for the federal government around eco-design. We worked with RMIT on a project a couple of years ago that did recommend tightening up import standards and then having the ACCC police that. In Europe, they have a consumer alert service. I can't remember the name. You guys might know of that. And if there is concerns about the chemical content in a product, that gets circulated quite quickly around competition regulators. It's something that the Productivity Commission here has also considered.
Before I do that, I just want to come up a level and just say, Johan, a couple of people have mentioned the EU directives. It might be useful if you could, what works in Europe as far as the EU directives that really move the dial that Australia should be looking at? What are the big ones?
I wouldn't know, to be honest. At least not on the level what worked and what doesn't. I know that, I don't know why, but it works. In Europe, we have a common understanding of our aims. That's something that's decided on a higher level. And an interesting example is a couple of years ago, they had a directive on energy use of buildings, which actually, companies feared it in the beginning when it was announced, but it worked like an accelerator because the directive was more or less if you build something new, it should be label A++. If you renovate, you should bring it up 2 labels. So that somehow appeared a huge investment for the sector, but it ended up being actually an accelerator because everybody knew that from A++ comes A++, etc. So everybody who started renovating a building didn't do 2 steps, but they brought it all to A++ or better, which created, not only in the Netherlands, but all over Europe, huge race of sustainability of our buildings just by one directive, which we all agreed on. And we have more directives. It's, I think it's the, at least from a Dutch perspective, we agree on the aims and the ambitions that we have in Europe, and some of the things we can do on a national level, and whatever we think should be done on European level, we then also commit to. And it's not because we're such nice people, but it makes sense for us.
Yeah. Sorry, there was a question down there. Shannon?
Hi, Guada. My question is, I'm just, well, Johan, I'm very impressed that your government understands that it is a global and a shared responsibility and is willing to invest in, you know, other countries and to advance the issue globally. I guess you mentioned we may not be 30 years behind in Australia, but, you know, for the Australian counterparts, you know, how do we, in the Netherlands or the EU, is that the public sentiment? Is there a willingness to pay by the taxpayers to fund those sorts of initiatives? And in the Australian context, how far are we from that thinking of recognising that it's a shared global responsibility in order to be able to make real progress in the circular economy space?
Your question is why taxpayers are accepting that their money is spent on that?
Yes.
Well, that's called democracy, I guess. It's an interesting question because we, well, I wanted to say recently, but I think 5 months ago we had elections, and actually tomorrow, isn't it, Joan? Tomorrow we'll have probably a new cabinet, which is quite extremely right-wing, so we're quite curious what will happen to all these policies and aims. In the same time, a lot of what we are doing is somehow connected to international agreements and European policies, so we can't just bail out, but that will be a discussion. From the people's perspective, I think given that outcome of the election, that might change a bit. In general, we have also the feeling that circular economy is not only good for climate change and biodiversity and pollution, but also for our wallet. We are quite... What's happening?
Oh, I apologize.
It's your watch
I think it's my
talking.
watch going off. Everyone want to hear it?
Your watch wants to be part of the discussion. I'll try to keep on talking.
Bam! It's an international problem.
You brought me a bit of my apropos. Where was I?
The elections and
What's going to happen?
what's going to happen.
After your elections in 2 days or tomorrow?
Yeah, but there was something else I wanted to say about that, but I lost that. It might come back.
Sorry.
Other hands? All right, in which case I will go. Richard and Phil, we've all worked in the mergers, acquisitions, we've all worked in the investment space. How do we, you know, we have to invest something of the order of between 10 and $20 billion in the next 6 years in order to hit the Australian targets. Good luck getting that kind of investment. But how do we massively accelerate it and get Veolia to come and invest more, you know, international companies? What couple of things would make a real difference? I mean, I have a view that the data that Richard's talking about and the infrastructure needs assessment and the gap analysis and a prospectus is kind of the best immediate thing we could do, and that should be done 3 months and be done and be on the record. Are there others like that that you think, yep, that's a no-brainer?
Investment in this country is required. The thing that we need is certainty, and no one's going to invest without the certainty. And on any major project, and we could be talking 10 million, 100 million, or EFW, you know, closer to $1 billion, you need that certainty. You need the certainty of where it's going to go. You need certainty of an approval. You need certainty of guaranteed feedstock over the term of your contract. And that's a volume issue which Australia doesn't have. I think that's the challenge we've got is A, the volume is low, and B, the volume is dispersed.
Yeah.
And so we don't have that concentration that exists in Europe. You need the guaranteed offtake of whatever that product is. The technology is not the problem. I think it was on Jess's slide. The technology is not the problem. And so once you've got all the inputs, the outputs, the location, then you go and find your technology, fill the gap in the middle, and then you can go and get your financial support to deliver a project. But sitting above all of that is the policy and regulation. The policy and regulation certainty, and certainly not the unwinding of policies and regulations, that doesn't help either. But that's the driver that this country, this state actually needs. And without that certainty of, and we're talking volumes, so if we're talking council volumes, that's the collaboration, it's the joint procurement, and that needs to be certain. We can't have 6 councils getting together for a tender process and then halfway through the process, one of them drops out because the mayor changes or something. If you're in, you're in. If you're not, you're not. Like, we need that certainty on the guaranteed feedstock. We need the policy certainty out there, and that's at a federal level and at a state level. So I think they're the drivers the money's there, the technology's there. As you know, getting an approval for a location, that can be challenging and off-putting. And why would you invest $1 million to $2 million to $3 million in obtaining approval for a site if you don't have the guaranteed feedstock and you don't have the guaranteed policies that's going to service that? So we need the policies even before we go through the planning pathways. Certainty is the answer.
Yep, certainty, certainly a big part of that question, isn't it? I agree with you, Mike. Data is critical. I think we're getting there. Most of the states now have good waste infrastructure assessments. Data is relatively available to varying levels of granularity. So not that you would necessarily want to build your whole investment case on that, and I'm not sure that Paris is going to accept a high-level statewide needs assessment, even though it is going to be at regional scale, which is what we're currently doing. But you've got to be able to attract attention and international money. You're competing with the rest of the world for Veolia money. We need other investors in the space as well. Maybe the other reflection on that, and it's very much in that collaborative vein, is the need to have a whole value chain take on these things. So, at this conference, we obviously mostly, focused on the downstream part of the chain. If you want to be securing feedstocks, you need to understand exactly what those feedstocks are, how they're coming through the chain, what the opportunity are for higher order interventions. How do you design that chain to optimise it? And to Jessie-Lynn's point, you're going to invest in, if you get someone early into that design conversation and the value chain conversation, investment becomes a different story than just how do we invest to kind of take residual waste at the end of the chain. So a much greater focus on a whole industry, a whole value chain perspective.
Questions? Did I see David put his hand up before? David?
Thanks, Mike. David Cox, MRA Consulting. Questions for Jessie, actually. Really curious around that sort of intensive agriculture approach with the greenhouses and integrating in the various aspects of generational electricity, etc. And you made a comment there talking about waste inflows into those facilities and enabling that. Obviously, within Australia, with the context is we've got these broadacre farming systems, and we've got FOGO, and we're making compost to an Australian standard, of which there's still quite some debate what it should really look like. I'm really intrigued in how do you get nutrients from the waste sector, from food waste, back into those greenhouses?
So food waste, so the recovered nutrients you're talking about, that stream, right? That's actually the most challenging stream because we grow hydroponically, so our root system is very exposed. That's where we do most of our research and development on. So we have our A and B tanks. We have very managed ratios that we give our plants. And as we're developing right now in terms of life sensoring, because right now when we grow hydroponically, we have EC sensors, pH sensors, daily, bi-daily, or bi-weekly lab assessments to make sure that we can recirculate our irrigation and drain water continuously. For lettuce, we actually never throw away the water. For tomato, we have an end of harvest water that we keep and then maybe grow algae on, for example, at the end. This is our dot on the horizon. So in terms of CO2, heat, water, electricity, etc., this is what we can do. And then we have our pilot and test facilities in our newest, latest greenhouses in the Middle East, where we're upgrading and using recycled nutrients and seeing how we can liquefy, would be the English word, and really use it in the same, in the same way that we would use imported fertilizer. If we go to that, then you have the greenhouses that are fully operational on waste. But it's balancing that is really the challenge. So now we're also phasing it out in steps where we're like, okay, we have specific crops that would be perfect for really controlled environmental agriculture. You have maybe some more mid-tech greenhouses next to it, where you still have root systems that are less sensitive, where you can use the upgraded nutrients, and then open field where you would use different. So there would be, again, combined, co-located agricultural facilities where different quality waste streams would go to different type of high-tech greenhouses, the same as you saw on the slide with all the different greenhouses there. If that answers your question.
Now, I can't let that go, Phil, without referring to you and Veolia and what you're doing at Woodlawn. So why don't you paint the picture for us?
Woodlawn precinct has a number of activities on there, bioreactor landfill. It actually has the mechanical biological treatment process. We have a fish farm there. Hopefully in the not too distant future we'll have an energy from waste facility, which then leads into potential CO2 benefits and offtake from that. That's the site precinct discussion, but I think this goes back to an early presentation today. I think Bron was talking about hubs and spokes. We actually need, back to that whole infrastructure piece around the hubs and spokes of where do we do these things that are collaborative, interactive, reliant on each other because of those inputs and outputs. And I was going to lead that back to a question to Jess around where do you take Australia? I know it's a big country, but what are the drivers of success? Are they standalone projects or are they within hubs of other activities? And then ultimately, how do you trigger the investment for those? But interested in the location and why they are where they are.
Where they are right now or going into the future? Well, the reason why I joined this mission as well is there's so much synergies between the greenhouse sector, between agriculture and waste. Why is it not being done before? What is stopping us? And a lot of the projects that we've been doing in Australia, but also other regions that have a lot of policy and have a lot of restrictions sometimes even, are mostly standalone projects where we don't have a lot of choice in terms of what we input into the greenhouse. It's already been chosen by the time that we get in, whether that would be groundwater or imported nutrients, etc. So now what we're attempting and the angle that we're taking is really to see if there are possibilities to join the discussions early on on the design table and be there early enough with the people who are willing to co-locate, to find the right neighbors, to really integrate these different concepts from an industry to industry level and see how we can synergize early enough before it goes out in a restricted manner. But it is like a Rubik's Cube, right? Fitting all these different pieces together, but I think we can do it. So, and in terms of financing and investment, for us, it's much more interesting to be co-located next to a waste facility that has a supply of CO2 than it is to be dependent on imported liquid CO2. It's much more interesting for us to have stabilized prices as to be dependent on the grid. For us, it's not just of course, it's about circularity and it's about doing the right thing for the planet and it's about how we have to move forward. But financially, it's actually more attractive for us to be in these co-location hubs and to be joining in together. So there's a financial incentive and an environmental incentive, and it affects both the return on investment but also return on environment. So I see that as a very positive way of working together. And a large reason for us to join is also to really figure out the lay of the land and see where those restrictions are with a lot of companies that are already working with those co-location hubs. But I'm optimistic. But I'm an optimistic person, so I don't know. But
I'm going to flick that to Richard and David up the back. I mean, New South Wales is particularly bad at doing circular economy hubs, industrial ecology hubs, we've tried it for 2 decades, and I think there's probably 2 really small ones that what tends to happen is companies just sit together and do stuff over the fence bilaterally, commercially, but centralised planning for waste resource hubs is anathema to the Department of Planning. Whereas in Victoria, they have whole precincts that are, all waste assets, all common uses, sort yourself out, boys. Richard, do you see any change in the Department of Planning as far as high-level strategic? We tried with the Aerotropolis and got nowhere. I don't know if you did. What's your take?
Yeah, look, it's a really good observation, Mike, and Victoria is absolutely different. I think South Australia as well, more willing to get into kind of strategic land use planning than we are in New South Wales. I had some hope with the Greater Cities Commission that they were developing kind of city plans for, and excuse me for those not in Sydney, but for the Wollongong region, Greater Sydney and the Hunter, and they were doing that kind of long-term visioning exercise. And then how do we start doing land use planning? And that seems to have fallen over when they got sucked back into the Department of Planning. So I, at the moment, don't see that government's stepping into that strategic planning space, but look, we haven't had any discussions about that. That's all I can say. Maybe happening somewhere, but it's not what we're hearing.
To David, how did Victoria get to having the Dandenong precinct and the northern precincts and co-locating all these activities?
Cheap land, a long way from people. But more seriously, 10 years ago, Victoria released its statewide infrastructure plan or thereabouts, which identified a number of key strategic hubs in and around the metropolitan area where, there'd been this coalescing of waste type industries, and the government expressed, a real want to have further development of those sorts of industries in those locations. There's some really good examples. So in Western Melbourne, Alex Fraser had a site, and adjacent to it now has been developed, there's a waste-to-energy facility going in adjacent to it, and there's some asphalt plants there as well, and so there's the opportunity for energy use and material crossing over. I'm a little concerned though, sort of looking forward, because recently there's been the draft VRIP, which is Victorian Resource Recovery Infrastructure Plan, that's been released, and the rhetoric around those hubs has disappeared. So I don't think there's an intent to say we don't want this to happen, but it's not quite as explicit as it once was. So I think, over the last 10 years, there's been a really constant rhetoric about we've got these hubs, we've got these places where we want to seize the opportunities for co-location, getting these similar businesses in place. I'm concerned though that with the VRIP, the way it's being expressed at the moment, we may have lost that a little bit, and we may be losing that ground, because I think it was a really good transition.
Certainly from MRA's perspective, we find local government approaches to say we want to do a circular economy hub or a circular economy precinct, and because they're not doing strategic land use planning, they find it very difficult to move beyond coffee cup recycling or repair shops or kind of very small scale projects. They don't have a capacity to do, particularly in Sydney or those extended Sydney area, that kind of regional structural planning stuff, to bring big corporates to the table and go, right, we're doing something interesting here. Whereas Victoria, South Australia have really gotten the march on Sydney, and I wonder if it's just completely too late for us, that whole horse is bolted. Questions from the floor? If not, I can go on all day. And if anybody... Yep.
I just remembered what I've...
Oh, excellent. Hey, you...
Actually, I remembered 5 minutes ago.
Well, you're no worse than me, is all I can say. Yeah.
You mind your watch now? It was about elections and arguments for circularity, and where we come from is circularity added to sustainability as an instrument for sustainability. But what it also is it's about prosperity, it's about making money, but then in the right way. And even a right-wing government will recognize the economic potential of circularity. So that's why me and my colleagues at the moment, we are curious what will happen, but we're not afraid that we're going to lose our jobs, because circularity, in our country, right-wing means you might actually deny climate change, because it's just not knocking at our door at the moment. But still, the economic perspective of being a new and innovative economy, that's still something that will keep on driving circularity as well. That was the last part of my answer.
Great. Yeah, you're on.
Yep, thanks, Mike. Damien Connell from Ratio Consultants, formerly from Victorian Government. I'm just interested in just getting back to the previous point that you made about the planning process, and you mentioned New South Wales, but I often see a lot of outcomes around circular economy, and just bear with me, I know we're talking about international collaborations, but I see a lot of impacts around materials flows, waste, etc. And what I'm trying to grasp with is dealing with a lot of developers, property developers, planning, that sort of thing. I don't see a lot of circular economy really pushed into that area. I think it's a really big area that we could be doing a lot more, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. What are some of the opportunities so that we can start to embed circular economy in future developments, so that we're planning now for 30 years rather than having to go back and sort of re-engineer it in 20 years and the like.
We're looking at Phil and Richard.
Incentives and disincentives. I think each time we talk about recycling, recovery, leading to circular economy, I think we need to acknowledge that there's a cost in doing that today. And the flip side of that is apparently we've got a cost of living crisis and nobody wants to increase our costs. So there's a lot of pushback from developers and others to say you're imposing additional costs on us, and I'm going to pass them on to the consumer or the purchaser. And it's all that short-term thinking about today, and that's where we need to change the shift of what we're doing is not changing today, it's actually changing tomorrow. Back to the incentives and disincentives, we need those. That sort of policy is driving attention to the issue and going for A++ or A++ in the built environment, that we end up over time the stock of housing is more energy efficient, and so that we're actually going to reduce our energy demands in the future, because each time we upgrade, it's going to be there. Now, we've done a bit of that I'm more familiar with New South Wales, but that's where we need more. And then the disincentive is back to, well, what should we not be doing, and really discourage some of those poor behaviours. And again, that's the strength or willingness of government, and it's not politically comfortable to impose things on the population. And Australia's doesn't like that very much. I don't think anybody does. But Australia's response is every time there's something additional that's imposed on them, there's immediate pushback, and that's part of our political system. And as a result of that, we end up with a status quo of maybe incremental slight change, because no one's prepared to stand up there and say, we must do this. The current government has obviously changed that in regards to its energy requirements, but overall, there's not a consensus that we need to go on this journey.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that what we're finding is existing stock in built environment. I've heard a lot of great presentations this morning about transitioning that built environment as, construction is where it's at. And I know there's a ministerial advisory group looking at recommendations on the built environment. That will take time. But what my fear is, I guess, from a Victorian perspective, is we've also got the housing statements talking about, building 800,000 homes over the next year, and I've been through that multiple times. Couldn't find one reference there to circular economy, sustainability, some sort of aspirations, but there's absolutely no detail, and I'm just concerned that we're going to be building, nearly 1 million homes, really poor stock, greenfields, and all the circular economy opportunities to be designed out.
Well, I'll make a comment on that. If you think of the economy as having two ends, one is the design phase before you come into the economy, and the other one is the kind of out phase. We can do the out phase pretty easily with all those new housing stocks. We just up the levy, and that'll make more and more of it go into the construction, demolition, sorting platforms, and more will be built, and we'll get above the 80% recovery rate that we have in New South Wales. So the fact that Victoria has pushed their levy up to $169, I would have liked it done instantaneously, but it will start to bring the C&D sector recycling will grow. That does nothing to the design phase at the front of the economy, which is what are we building and are we building it for repurposing, reuse? And I don't know if any of you have seen the John Thwaites circular economy strategy that was released last week. Some of you who are old will remember the Barry Jones Spaghetti Junction press conference that he got lambasted for because it was meaningless. Well, one could draw the same analogy to the National Circular Economy Strategy that was released. I think there's one action in there, which is government procurement around circularity, and I think that's useful. We can measure that and go forward, but the rest of it, and I please invite you all to read it and comment on it, because it's uninterpretable in terms of setting out what we're trying to achieve for a circular economy. Uninterpretable. But please, it's open for public comment. But you're 100% right. We have not done the design phase of the economy at all. And every speaker so far that's looked at that has said, we just don't design for circularity in anything in our economy.
Can I comment? Because there is another perspective, and it makes sense on a waste conference that you talk from the waste management perspective. But where we started in circular economy in the Netherlands and in Europe, it started with an analysis from, it was by McKinsey, and they used a model to predict to a certain level of certainty the impact of circular economy on your economy. And for every European country, including Europe as a whole, there was a significant positive impact. So the economy will grow, you will create jobs, net jobs. So there will be jobs lost in some sectors, but there will be a lot of new jobs. But that only will happen if you look at it systemically. So if you talk about cost and benefit in waste management, you're probably right. Things will happen, things will change, but on other aspects in your economy, things might pop up and grow. And altogether, the Australian economy will benefit from getting to circularity, but only if it's a complete, well, systemic change. That's a huge word, but we tend to use it a lot the last few years. We are in a systemic change. And there will be some losers, but there will be more winners all over. And I think that's an add-on to the perspective of only looking at waste and costs. It's broader than that, and if you talk about design of products, next to that is design of new business models, next to that is new jobs in repair and remanufacturing, which we don't do anymore, which, well, 50 years ago that was normal, and now we don't have it anymore. That needs to come back, and that will create jobs and prosperity and more economic value overall. And that's the perspective from the McKinsey study, and we replicated that on country level, and a lot of countries did that. And I expect that Australia can do the same with the McKinsey model. It will be refined a bit probably, and see what the outcome is for your complete economy. And you can do that on state level as well.
Richard, did you have that to speak to?
Not much further to add. I think volume building of homes is a problem. Sure, bigger buildings, Green Buildings Council, the Green Star scheme is becoming quite mature, and the skills are coming into that sector. They're starting to figure out how to take the metrics and put it into their design models and build out that skill set. So infrastructure, Sustainability Council and the Green Star for buildings, but homes I think is definitely a problem.
Yeah, we don't even mandate solar panels on the roof as a design function. David again?
Sorry, I keep asking too many questions. I'm really interested in the policy at levers differences between here and what we're seeing overseas. And what I haven't heard mentioned once at this conference is a price on carbon and the impacts on that in supporting the circular economy. I'd really like to get the views from our international panel members in terms of what impact that has either in supporting the delivery or the introduction of a circular economy.
I missed the
Price
point,
on carbon.
what you want
Price.
our views on.
Carbon price driving circular economy policy development in Europe. What's the role of the carbon price?
I think that's difficult. At least I find it difficult. Part of what's happening with carbon pricing and carbon trading in carbon credits is that it creates value, so you can trade, so it makes it more substantial. But what's also happening at the moment is that it's creating a kind of virtual market, and I think that's there are projects now proposed that have a business case on assumed value of future carbon credits. That's a bit like how the American crisis began anyway. It's buying stuff on a value that's not there, and that's a danger in the system. But in the same time, making it monetary makes it also concrete and more or less tangible. So it's both ways. It can be positive, but you need to be careful.
Jessie-Lynn, do you add carbon pricing into your greenhouse gas business cases? The greenhouse house business cases?
No. But I've heard some good stories about Australian carbon potential. But when you would look, for example, at our US greenhouses, because it's then eaten, so then it's just passed on the way the CO2 goes through, to put it neatly, then around 4% is taken up by the crop. And it also depends on the type of greenhouse. So if you have a greenhouse that uses a lot of CO2, there's a lot of air exchange, then 4% is taken up by the crop. If you take a more closed system, then you reach higher percentages. But then again, it's sold as food, it's eaten, and then it's emitted into the environment in a different way.
What we would call biogenic carbon, so it's just part of the cycle.
It's part of the cycle,
On that point, I don't know if anyone can comment on where are we up to with the carbon border adjustment mechanism going into Europe, that they were going to impose an equivalent carbon price on Australia, and it was going through the European Parliament last year. Has it happened? Does anybody know? Because that was going to impose a shadow carbon price on Australia, whether we wanted one or not. If you're an exporting company, you needed to embed that carbon liability, and if you didn't do it, the Europeans were going to do it to us, which brought Australia up to the rest of the world. But it was being debated in the Parliament last time I saw it. Richard, you and I, consultants, buddy, we're supposed to know this stuff. Fail. No, any other questions from the floor? Otherwise, I'm going to ask for any final comments and then let you off a little early.
I'm just going to link in the carbon component of this. The waste sector, and for those that have been coming to this conference for many decades, it was all about landfill diversion or reduction from landfill. And then we got into some recycling KPIs, and then we started talking about a circular economy, which was kind of a bit unsure. But I think this is the evolution of the sector, and it's changed dramatically over the years, and it's fantastic to see the evolution. And we're now having the carbon impact conversation as part of, so thanks, Dave, for the question, but it is actually part of, and so in New South Wales, we have a circular economy policy, we have a carbon policy, we have waste policies, and the departments that are looking at that are thinking about it. I don't think we've embedded them all together, but it's that evolution of our changing thinking about what are we actually trying to achieve out of all of this. And obviously, we're trying to reduce our carbon impact by recycling and recovering and reusing those materials like for like, not downcycling. And so that then will offset the next phase of carbon generation through the manufacturing and using of raw materials. So it's in there, and we're on that journey, and it's great to see it's not all meshed together in the beautiful summary yet.
Final comment, Richard?
I might just jump in one more on that, the shadow pricing issue. I was at the Product Stewardship Forum last week, and they had a presentation from the European Commission talking, amongst other things, about their forthcoming eco-design for sustainable design regulation. Joan, jump in if you need to, which coming in July 1, again at the EU level, and then they're going to start sector-based kind of consultations with a view to having by 2027 some eco-design standards within your product manufacture of targeted streams, which I think might end up being then a competitive trade barrier if we don't have similar metrics and design capability in our export products to Europe.
Good. Last comment from either Johan, Jessie-Lynn?
I just wanted to say it was good to be here, and that if you want to speak to me and Johan afterwards, we're at the Netherlands booth. We also have smoothies there. great stories about greenhouses. There's other companies. You're very welcome to join, and otherwise we'll see you at the superhero party, right? The superhero party tonight. So.
And villains, right?
And villains, yes. Did you want to join the?
Well, not about villains. Yeah, well, two small comments. Well, actually, that's after 2 weeks being here. One, make sure that whatever you do around circular economy is connected to each other. So if you have a policy on waste and on carbon and on circularity, then my question is, can somebody put a needle through it? Because they are connected. Carbon is connected to circularity. Embedded carbon is a huge part of why circular economy fights climate change. So make sure it's connected. That's the one. And the other is what I said this morning to Tony from the EPA. Yes, you might be 30 years behind, let's be honest, it can be, but there's no reason to stay so far behind. Join up, connect, make your calls and your contacts in Europe, especially in the Netherlands, and it's not about copy-paste, but at least about how we made our choices, from which ambitions derived which choices, and what were our messages, and how did that work out. There's no copy-paste in there, you're a very different country. But in the same time, there's a lot of lessons and probably inspiration to make the same type of choices and catch up in a couple of years.
All right, I think we're done. Would you join with me in thanking our panel for a very interesting and wide-ranging conversation?